welcome everyone. My name is David Kovel. One of my roles is General Counsel or Co-General Counsel of the World Jurist Association, which is why they asked me to do this, I think. Also, it just so happens that my firm knows something about ESG, which is what the topic of this conference and this meeting in particular is. So it's a convenient coincidence. I apologize. I was called in at the last moment because Diego Solana, and so was Kim. And my big apology is because we have a panel of very, very distinguished speakers, and I don't have the resumes. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. But I thought the best thing to do was for me to just introduce them briefly now, and then when it's their turn to speak, they can describe their resumes a little bit more than I can. And so without much further ado, the one other thing is I'll start with Kim Quarles because I think she's going to be planning on doing a general overview of what ESG is, and I can't wait to hear that because I think it's an amorphous topic at best. And then we'll move on to other substantive topics of the other speakers. So the panelists, as I said, one is Kim Quarles, who one of her jobs is Executive Vice President of the World Jurist Association, although she has others that are equally impressive in the commercial world. And then as well, we have Delei Peng, which I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce quite well. And he's the Dean and Professor at the Law School of the East China University of Science and Technology. And you're an external reviewer for the World Trade Annual Report of WTO, is that right? Yeah. Interesting. Now on the list it says Diego Solana, who is also affiliated with the World Law Foundation, is here, but he's not. So don't read into the to the schedule anymore about him. But we have Dongli Huang from China, who's also a professor. She's at Hebei University, and she is a specialist in economics and business, if I have that right.
I'm an expert in WTO law. I'm a panel member of WTO.
She's an expert in WTO law.
Yes.
So we have two WTO experts, and we're going to be speaking.
Related.
Yeah.
Related.
Excellent. And then last, but not least, is Gabriela Rachadell del Delgado, who is from Venezuela, I believe, and co-managing partner, head of energy at Interjuris Abogados. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Who is one of the sponsors of this conference.
And a sponsor of the conference. Excellent. And a sometime resident of New York City.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for the coffee.
And just one more brief mention. My other job is I'm a lawyer, co-managing partner with my partner Dan Hume at a firm called Kirby McInerney, and we do financial fraud litigation, and a number of our cases involve ESG. So I'm going to ask Dan Hume, who is not on the list, to speak a little bit about ESG as we perceive it from our legal perch in New York City. So without further ado, Kim Quarles, can you start off the panel?
So I, as David mentioned, I'm the Executive Vice President of the World Jurist Association. I'm Senior Vice President of Willis Towers Watson, which is a global insurance brokerage. We have offices in, I think, 300 countries. I'm also the former Vice Chair of the Department of Global Communications at the United Nations, and I'm also the UN representative on ECOSOC and Department of Global Communications representing the World Jurist Association. Also a fellow of the American Bar, which I still can't believe that I got elected as a fellow. I mean, I still can't believe it.
You're amazing.
Congratulations.
Amazing.
So my job this afternoon is to sort of just do a basic overview, because we have people who are subject matter experts on environmental, social, and governance issues. And what I want to try to do is to put in context what the challenges are when you are trying to comply with ESG, but you may be living in a country, and I think Venezuela is a very good example. You may, as an attorney, be practicing law in a country where they are not complying with what the standards of the rule of law dictate they should be doing. So what can lawyers do to not only ensure that their clients are, and this is very, very basic, to ensure that their clients are in compliance with ESG mandates, but also how do you address that very difficult conundrum of the rule of law and trying to comply with the rule of law and the implications for ESG if your country is not in compliance with the rule of law. So how do you define rule of law? So I'll give some criteria for compliance, but basically it's laws, regulations, and rights that not only have the backing of the state, but the state is also constrained by that law and is also constrained by the doctrines of they can't operate arbitrarily and they must operate fairly and within those rules of law. Mm-hmm. So a company that is in a rule of law compliant country derives a number of benefits. They can sort of not sit back and relax, but they do derive benefits. The state itself combats corruption. The state itself combats discrimination. It maintains security. It protects rights and obligations. And it also enforces environmental regulations, which makes it easier for a company to be compliant with ESG. So governments that have strict and strong rule of law compliance, they help corporations, it facilitates them to have best practices. So this, conversely, weak compliance creates monumental issues and vulnerabilities, which even if your client is fully compliant with ESG and has a very good program for compliance with ESG, those vulnerabilities can jeopardize even the best program of compliance.
Kim,
So-
can I throw you a curveball?
Please.
When working for a multinational company like yours, what do you think? What does the company interpret ESG to mean?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think, and one of the challenges is that each country has their own, and believe me, I was looking at it this morning, I have 16 compliance tests that I have to take for each area that I do business in. So each country has different compliance rules, and as an employee of a global company, you have to make sure that you are always in compliance with those rules and regulations. And so literally when I get back from here, I have seminars and tests and things that I have to take to show that we are in compliance, me personally and the other 45,000 employees are in compliance with these rules of law.
Wow.
And just to follow up on that, so ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance.
Right.
There are so compliance with those particular laws must be. It seems awfully specific. Is that? But there are those.
I think that is again much more senior, well above my pay grade. They deal with the more specific, board decisions regarding corporate compliance with ESG. But what they do for the employees, no matter what level. I mean, this is someone even, my administrative assistant has to take and has to show that she has complied with, so that it bubbles up, so that all of the 45,000 employees of Willis are making sure that when my chairman reports to my board of directors, they can say that they can certify of the 45,000 employees, I'll make up a number, 38,000 have completed the compliance requirements, and we are still following up with the remainder to make sure that they comply.
Understood.
So, and this I think touches on the next topic. I think ESG must incorporate a solid understanding of the rule of law and the context of the rule of law. And one of the challenges is when you are in a country that does not have compliance with rule of law, that entity also has to have strategies, or the attorneys who, and I think you can speak to this in more detail, those attorneys need to be advising their clients not only on ESG compliance, but also on rule of law compliance. One of the things that, and I took this from an ABA article, one of the data from a 2021 World Justice Project, it's petrifying. What compliance and rule of law, and of the 139 countries that were surveyed, for the 4th year in a row, rule of law compliance had decreased in 74% of those countries. 139 countries, 4 years in a row, completely decreased in rule of law compliance. This is scary. This is very, very frightening, because now the lawyer is not only having to advise on ESG compliance, but in the context of ESG compliance, what then do you need to look at? So again, from the ABA article, this survey also ranks and scores jurisdictions on 8 factors that indicate compliance. And I'll read from it. It's constraints on governmental powers, absence of corruption, fair and impartial governmental operations, adherence to fundamental rights, order and security, regulatory enforcement, and justice in the civil and criminal environment. So from the ESG perspective, this deterioration in 139 countries, it has to be a wake-up call. And for the lawyers who are advising their client, it has to be a wake-up call. And even though many entities, many corporates have made significant improvements, if you have weak compliance with rule of law, it becomes a non-issue. Compliance in the ESG is a non-issue. One of the challenges, too, in trying to devise strategies for rule of law compliance, particularly in jurisdictions that are not compliant, it can be very dangerous, particularly in those jurisdictions where governmental retribution can be swift, dangerous, or deadly. Mm-hmm. And so when you're advising your client on ESG compliance, you also have to be concerned about the implications for what you do if you're telling your client to be compliant with the rule of law, but the government may say you're going to jail. Mm-hmm. So you can, as Willis does, be compliant. You can have training, you can have assessments, you can have the appropriate procedures, you can have all of this. It doesn't address the underlying rule of law. So how can companies address rule of law issues without, in a rule of law, non-rule of law compliant country? How do they try to comply? So again, from the ABA article, you can indicate privately, you can indicate publicly, you can say, we are tracking government compliance on rule of law issues. You can refer to this WJP report. You can refer to other reports, the Wall Street Journal, and say that we are using these metrics in our business decisions. You can work through trade associations. Here in the United States, we have the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. They have an initiative on rule of law, the coalition, the Corporate Alliance for the Rule of Law. The ABA has a subsection of their business committee that focuses on creating incentives to encourage attorneys and their clients to comply. You can engage, again, this is very dependent on the government, but you can engage government counterparts to try to address those issues. You can do that by promoting research on global standards. So this way you can do this in a way that doesn't say, you're not rule of law compliant, but what you can say is, we've done research on this issue and this is what we have found, what other countries are doing. You can involve, if you're a multinational company, as Willis is, you can involve your home country to say to another country, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. And you can provide financial and in-kind support.
Excellent.
Very good.
That's the entire presentation.
Excellent.
Excellent presentation.
Well said. Well, that's, from the perspective of a corporation, I can understand this. From the perspective of a professor, what does ESG, I'll start with Mr. Peng, what does ESG mean for you, if that's, and how does it impact the rule of law, if it does at all, from your perspective?
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So thank you very much, our chair. So I'm very happy to be here. And actually, I mainly focus on international economic law. So the ESG and the rule of law also is a new topic for me. So I see this chance to give my understanding on this topic, like you said, the ESG and the impacts of ESG to rule of law. So my presentation is divided into 3 parts. The first part is ESG and sustainable development. And the second part is ESG in international investment law, because my research area mainly focuses on international law. And finally is ESG and the business compliance, maybe very familiar, related with our first speaker, Kim Quarles. So at the beginning, I think I will give you some basic information. The ESG, we are all familiar with, is about environmental, social, and governance. So for the environmental, it's much related like climate change, carbon emission reduction, and for the social, it's much related to community relations, mental health, and gender and diversity inclusion, and so on. And for the governance, maybe like the best practice and good regulation, and so on. So as we know, in 2015, all member states of the United Nations adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This agenda consists of 17 sustainable development goals that provide a shared blueprint for a more peaceful world. So for example, for the environmental, we can find like the goal 6, goal 7, goal 12, all are related to environmental. For example, the goal 6, like ensure availability and sustainable management of water. Yeah, and like goal 15 means protect, promote sustainable use of ecosystem. So, and also the social, like the goal 3, goal 11. These goals are much related to the social, as, for example, the goal 3 is to ensure health, lives, and promote well-being for all at all ages. And the goal 11 for this gender, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, and sustainable. So this is part 1. It's about the ESG and sustainable development, like the conception and the UN sustainable development goals. And so for part 2, I'd like to discuss the ESG in international investment law, means the sources of ESG in international investment law. So in my understanding, it including 4 levels. First level is domestic investment law. So actually we can search the ESG in some countries' domestic law. And the second is BIT. BIT means bilateral investment treaties or agreements. So actually we also find some ESG rules from the BIT. And the third is the FTA, means free trade agreement. And also we can also search some ESG rules or principles in from FTA. And finally is the international soft laws or principles, and also we can find the ESG rules from international soft laws. So these are the main points about part 2. So for example, for the first point about the domestic laws, like for example, we can find like Egypt investment law. The content of this law has some articles or provisions like labor rights and standards, environmental protection, and public health protections. For these domestic laws, it has these kinds of provisions or articles. So this is the first point. And for example, I will go example like Laos People's Democratic Republic of Investment Law. In Article 74, it has like environmental obligation for foreign investors. Yeah. And the second point is about BIT. So, for example, the Southern Africa Development Community Temple. So in Part 3, it regulates the rights and obligations of investors and the state parties. So in this temple, it has articles like environmental and social impact assessment. So it means investors or the investment should make the environmental and the social impact assessments. Okay, this is the second point. And the third point is the FTA or RTA. As for example, in China-Switzerland FTA, it asks both investors from both sides has to afford corporate social responsibility for sustainable development, CSR obligations. Also about the CPTPP, yeah.
ChatGPT.
Yeah. No, not chat. CPTPP,
CPTPP.
Comprehensive Trading Partnership. So, for example, it has an independent chapter, environment chapter. So for this chapter, it regulates, make sure the implement the commitments they have made under the international environment agreements, encourage the private sector to develop flexibility voluntary mechanisms to protect natural resources and environment. So that means the parties has the obligations to protect natural resources and the environment. And finally is about the international soft laws. So we can search ESG rules from international soft laws. So for example, in 2016, we know the G20 issued principles, guiding principles for investment policies, policy making. It covers 9 areas like anti-protectionism, sustainable development, the right to regulate, and also the responsible business conduct. So this is the guiding principles for investment policy making of G20. And also there are some principles for responsible investment advocated by United Nations in 2021. For example, in this principles, the content like we will incorporate ESG issues in investment, and we will be an active owner and incorporate ESG issues into our ownership policies and practice, and also we will seek appropriate disclosure on ESG issues. Yeah. So this is about the principles of responsible investment of the United Nations in 2021. Okay. And actually, for China, we also issued some guidelines on Chinese overseas investment, like, for example, we're promoting the version or actions of green building, the Silk Road economic belt, and the 21st century maritime Silk Road. Yeah. Okay. And finally, it's about the ESG and the business compliance. So I will give some Chinese practice. So for example, recently China issued some guidelines or regulations on ESG. So I will give you several examples. Like in 2013, we issued guidelines on environmental protection on overseas investment corporation. And also in 2018, we issued guidelines on compliance management of overseas operation of enterprises. And also last year, we issued the guideline for environmental protection of overseas investment corporation projects and so on. Yeah. So this is recent Chinese practice. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think in the future, for Chinese overseas enterprises, they will take the ESG seriously to fulfill ESG responsibility and disclose ESG information. Yeah. So that's it, because time is limited. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up question. I know in the United States, we have policies that are meant to apply to U.S. companies operating abroad, and I know it's very hard to enforce those policies, like anti-corruption and that sort of thing. Is there a mechanism in China that you know of for enforcement? In the United States, it's been very difficult.
So you mean for
To enforce the obligations, say for ESG obligations overseas, to in another country, if you understand the question.
you mean for Chinese
Yeah.
enterprises?
Yeah, if the policies so in the United States, I'm thinking about the United
I know,
States,
yeah.
sometimes it's very hard if the U.S. company is operating abroad to understand what it's doing and to protect against violations of the policies or the laws. And I know that's just a problem that's encountered quite frequently here, and I was wondering if that's something that's been encountered in China.
Yeah, just I have introduced in China, we issued some guidelines and
Yeah.
to give the companies some suggestion to help them to comply with the ESG rules. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, to comply with the domestic rules and
Yeah.
regulations. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Ms. Dongli Huang,
It's my turn?
it is your turn, and
Okay.
feel free to introduce yourself more than I
All
did.
right,
Okay,
So Diego is not here, so it's my turn.
it is.
Thank you for inviting, organizing. I am Dongli Huang from China, Hebei University of Economic and Businesses. I'm also the official name of this title is the member of the indicative list of the WTO panel. So
Nice.
I'm happy that the previous speakers I wonder if they would cover my contents. Fortunately, they have not, so I'm happy that I'm going to give my speech. I was a businesswoman and an entrepreneur before I became a legal practitioner and a legal expert in WTO rules. So when I think and deal with issues related to the trade law, the WTO rules, I often started from a business reality in addition to the legal aspect to make sense of the issues in question. So today, when sharing my thoughts in ESG, I would like to follow the same path, considering the business reality to make sense of the ESG and its relation to the rule of law. So my speak will have three parts. I will first give a very brief introduction to the relatively new concept of ESG, which David expected somebody to do so I'm doing it now.
Excellent.
Yes. I'll then highlights the controversies surrounding its application through the rule of law in the business world. I will not touch the political world. I deal with the business. So, and at the end, I will provide my perspective in comparison with the concept of human rights, which has long been fabricated into the practice of business, the world of economy through the enforcement channel of rule of law. So it is said that the concept of ESG can be traced back to ancient times. However, the recognition of this concept arises from the release of the WHO Wings that report in 2004 of the UN Global Compact. The Wings report in 2004 has a subtitle, Connecting Financial Markets to the Changing World, which to me, or should be to everyone, was an indication of its direct application at the time of ESG's official emergence. But in less than 20 years, this concept has poised to expand from financial market to business in general. So in the world of legal practice, it is said that managing an organization, legal consideration now means thinking about environmental, that's E, and social, S, and G, governance issues, just as Kim addressed.
Yeah.
Okay. Although this perspective emits a strong odor of business itself, it finds its solid ground in legislation from many very important world economic players, such as the EU, which is the pioneer in this area, that legislation wise, and Japan, Germany, Brazil, Australia, and Singapore. Whereas Canada, UK, and Hong Kong are poised to develop relevant legislation as well. So here comes the question. Should the business world take into consideration of issues such as climate change, inequality, diversity, inclusion, societal needs alongside of economic needs, and natural as well as social capitals? So in a planned view, the answer seems positive, because those objectives are what the rule of law called for. So as such, one might wonder why there are heated debate surrounding this noble idea. So make example of the United States. A growing number of states are passing laws to restrict the use of ESG factors in making investment and business decisions, claiming that ESG threatens investment returns and uses economic power to implement business standards beyond those required by law. So, political tug-of-war aside, with the importance of the ESG on the rise, legislators, regulators, and non-governmental actors around the world creating law and standards on ESG. The business world cries that one of the crucial principles protecting business from power interference, the principle of BJR, the business judgment rule, is weakened. In correlation to the growth of this ESG-related position, positive legal norms. So with the time constraint, I will have to jump to my conclusion. So as humans strive to achieve humanity, I couldn't help but to think of the situation of the concept of human rights, which arose 3/4 of a century ago. Similar political as well as economic debates rised at its official birth in 1948. So what happened now? The concept of human rights has become one of the most important achievements of human society. Some might say that the comparison between human rights and ESG does not match because of the discrepancy of the weights those two concepts carry. But think about this. If we were to lose the planet we live in, if we were not be able to maintain human dignity because of the inequality, so would we be regretted before it will be too late? So this is my thoughts. I welcome your generous comments and questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I know I personally have trouble with the term ESG because certain things at times seem much more important than others. For example, climate seems at some point to be an incredibly immediate emergency, whereas certain other problems may be really important but may not seem as important as saving the planet. But I've heard what you said, and in fact, in the United States, I think my partner Dan will speak to this. There has been a real conflict over what ESG means and whether it's really good for the United States and for governance in general. Dan, do you want to speak to that, or should we move?
Just one quick interjection, Dave, to your point. Antonio Guterres, who is the Secretary General of the United Nations, has said that of all of the Sustainable Development Goals, all of the goals related to climate change should be first, second, and third, rather than in the positions where they are, because frankly, if we can't save the planet, it doesn't matter if we have human rights, because no one will be alive to enjoy it.
Right.
And I'm summarizing what he had said in a very impassioned plea, but he basically says we must focus on climate issues first, and then we can deal with the other issues in the social contract.
Yeah, and I think Professor Huang, you said that too. Is this?
In my speech, I'm going to talk to something that it also affects the humans as its existence of the human being,
Right.
and
So-
it's not climate.
So without
So it's artificial intelligence and other things that I'm going to talk today. So the debate is really important, but sometimes the human existence also is related to something that is not only climate. That's my only point. But your point is totally fair.
Well, let's turn to your presentation,
Okay.
because I think it is appropriate, and your expertise in oil and gas may be applicable to the climate.
So the ones who have these, please go, because I made a presentation in order for all of you to
Can
be
I have
able.
a copy of it? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So basically, my name is Gabriela Rachadell de Delgado. Thank you, from Venezuela, Interjuris law firm. I'm co-managing partner with Juan Jose Delgado, who is here. He's the other partner manager of the firm. ESG and the rule of law in the digital transformation of oil and gas sector. I pick a very specific topic to make sure that I wasn't repetitive to what you were going to say. And because I am an oil and gas expert, so I thought it was important. And this is my fifth conference related to digital transformation for the oil and gas sector, because I think it is very important to create a conscience of how important it is digital transformation. So the first thing is that today's economy, yes, you can take this. Digital transformation and ESG have emerged as a significant and crucial subject within the global business community. According to the World Economic Forum, improving legal rights amplifies all other development activities. It creates institutional transparency, good governance, combats corruption, and in order to have a healthy security, equality, and environmental policies to be established in a country, it must first respect the rule of law. After we finish, we can talk about Venezuela, because it's the exact opposite of what it should be. However, I can tell you examples of how we have done it with our clients. We represent 45 oil companies doing business in Venezuela. Of course, all the big companies are there because we're the biggest reserve of oil in the world, but it's a very challenging environment for our clients on a daily basis. So digital transformation is the fundament, you can all pass the page. Digital transformation is a fundamental change process that enables digital technologies with the aim to radical improvement and innovation to an entity. It started by digitization, which is the change from analog to digital, then digitalization, which is all the processes that use digital formats in different companies, but then digital transformation, which is the third step, and many companies are now in digital transformation, implies a total change in the business model of the company to use these digital processes, but it is a complete change. So digital transformation leads to transparency, accuracy, efficiency, cost saving, reduction of human errors, faster response time, greater control, monitoring, measurement, and protection of people and assets, as well as environmental impact. So it is really relevant to ESG. One of the examples, we're going to see a few of the technologies used. One is artificial intelligence, which is nowadays very much on fashion because of ChatGPT and all what they call generative artificial intelligence, which is a step forward, the ones that we already have embedded in our day-to-day daily routines, like the algorithm that tell us content. So now the artificial intelligence is generative. So it creates by itself things that we didn't anticipate, okay? So the algorithm work like by themselves. And that creates a lot of challenges from the ethical and legal point of view. We will see it. From the oil companies, we can see several examples of artificial intelligence used to improve the environment. For instance, what ExxonMobil and MIT are doing with artificially intelligent robots to boost natural seeps detection capabilities. And natural seeps are something in the bed of the ocean that are formation of oil, and it's the first cause of pollution into the water. So oil to water goes naturally in the natural seeps, much more than when the oil company does something wrong. Is the prevention of that ExxonMobil is doing is going to help a lot more than anything else they are doing in their own company. Shell doing machine learning algorithm, or smart cognition with Aker BP, or total Google with Google Cloud. And one that is worth mentioning is everything that is being done with CO2 content to manage environmental footprint, like capture of CO2 and use of it. Another very important, you can pass the page. Another very important technology is virtual and augmented reality, and it's used a lot in oil companies nowadays to improve environment. For instance, with virtual reality, which is a fully immersed experience replacing physical reality, like the Apple lens, no? And then augmented reality is when there is an overlapping between digital created content and the real world. So all this, we will see that if you use that with Internet of Things, that is the communication protocols used by machines to talk among themselves without the use of human at all, no intervention, and also smart devices, which is the autonomous computer connectivity among the context-aware electronic devices, and robotics, which is the creation of machines that duplicate or replace human actions. All of it can be used, for instance, in something called digital twins. It's one example. You have a plant, and you use artificial intelligence and robotic in order to map the plant or facility, okay? And then this twin, which is like a clone, but it is called digital twin in terms of digital language. So this digital twin is exactly a replica, and using Internet of Things and sensors and virtual and augmented reality, you can do many things in the twin that will never create an impact in the environment or the people. So social and environment are protected because you do everything in the digital twin and not in the real thing. So you can do training with no risk. You can do certain hazardous experiments with no risk because it never happened in real life. It's just in the digital twin. So all that is great, fantastic, and everything that we have explained. However, there are several ethical and legal challenges related to all this. First of all, the pace of technology is faster than the legislation. So it means we have to have either international legislation, which is cumbersome because it takes a lot of countries to get, together and agree on certain principles. We can do self-legislation, which has proven to be not so accurate. Or we can do also, the contracts can fulfill some of the gaps of the legislation. So if two people get together and they sit and establish, what is going to do, what company is liable, what they should do, and create certain standards, that's also very good. And the standards that we have been discussing today, which are very important, that in China, the US, or globally, we can also do it through standards. The important things that we believe should be addressed are data privacy and property rights. for sure. The technological unemployment, which is one of the issues that many important people like Elon Musk and others are addressing, that the technology can substitute the humans in a way that can imply a lot of people out of jobs. And the loss of control over machines through manipulation, misuse, weaponization, or something called hallucination, which is when the machine believes something, but it's really not true. And the black box, which I explained already, that means the engineers creating algorithms and other technologies that they don't know how this is going to end and how this is going to work. So it's called black box, and definitely that's a huge issue for the human existence. Then cyber attacks also must be taken into account. All of this can be decided in the contract. So the contracts, in my way, has a lot to do with the rule of law. The law is legislation, but you can fulfill and do a lot of things that are not in the legislation because the pace of technology is so fast. You can do it through contract and through standards, self-imposed standards, or in connection with other companies in certain associations that will do the standards. In general, the ESG and the digital transformation with the energy sector is very important, that all the companies are embracing new technologies to optimize the ESG strategies. But it is very important that when we see clean energy, we know that the companies doing clean energies most likely will comply with ESG. However, the other companies, the original companies doing fossil fuels, are also doing a very important change in connection with digital transformation and the ESG. And the reality is that fossil fuel companies will persist and coexist alongside with the clean energy companies, especially in regions like Latin America or any developing region. So it is important that integrating the rule of law into ESG programs translates into the inclusion of clear and reliable legal principles that offer stronger footprint, a stronger footing for investors engaging in ESG-related activities. Thank you.
It's fascinating. Do you have any observations about how the challenges,
Yeah.
ESG-type challenges your clients are facing in Venezuela?
Yes. In Venezuela, we have something that some people call a dictatorship. In reality, we try not to say it because we go often there. So we prefer not to talk about it in our country and label it. But the reality is that there is a lot of challenges in a day-to-day basis because we have great rules, but not compliance. So what the companies that we represent do is that they self-impose standards and compliance. And the reality is that if you are very strong with the government and say, we will not do this or that, we will not affect the environment, we will not do anything that affects our labor policies, usually they are respectful if you are a big company bringing a lot of money. The problem is for small companies, which most of them are not our clients. Our clients are Fortune 500 type of companies. But us, as lawyers, many times we confront a problem because when we confront the government, because the oil and gas is a monopoly, many times they say, oh no, this is your lawyer telling you something that is not right. So it is very important to create a relationship with your client that they know that even if they cannot do the job or the business, they have to comply. Most of them already know. Some of them you have to remind them that this is the case, no? And say, if you want to do it, you can do it, not with me, because my name is not going to put next to something that doesn't comply with ESG. So that's also we have to many times explain well to the clients and say, we are not passing this line and be very, very strict. Because, the tendency is, if you make money, the tendency is to forget about it. We will never do it. And our clients will never do it too, because if they do, they are no longer our clients.
So, Gabriela, can I have a question?
Yes, of course.
I heard since you're from the law firm.
Huh?
You are from a law firm.
I am from a law firm.
Okay, so provide legal services to a client.
Yes, legal
So
services.
then the digital transformation in
Yes.
this sector, in what aspect that you provide the services for?
No, the thing is, digital transformation affects nowadays all the companies. So digital transformation for oil and gas companies, what we do is we help them to create better contracts with respect to digital transformation.
Okay,
For instance, let me give you an example. If you use blockchain, for instance, and you say, okay, who is going to do the blockchain and who is going to make sure that there is compatibility? So you have to make sure that in the contract is clear who is going to do what, who is liable for what, and who has to comply. And make sure that in all your contracts with your subcontractors, there is provisions regarding compliance with ESG standards, your own standards. So you as a huge company will impose down in the chain of contractors all the standards that you want your company to comply and your contractors to comply. So that's the way we help the clients to
So
do.
you're providing expertise, legal services in the age of the digital transformation of this oil sector.
Yes, we actually help the oil companies to do everything. So digital transformation is one piece of the whole service that we provide. We provide all type of legal services, but my area, which is I am the head of energy, I help energy companies to do everything, including digital transformation. Thank you.
Well, so we are done with the speakers who were on the schedule. We also have my partner Dan, who knows something about ESG from the United States perspective, and I think can speak to something that Professor Dongli Huang spoke about, which is in the United States, ESG has become something that's strangely controversial. Dan, do you want to speak to that, or do you want to speak to something else related to that?
That sounds great.
I'm putting Dan on the spot. He had no idea he was going to be speaking until about an hour ago.
That's okay. Yeah, so ESG rule of law in the United States right now, we have a situation where it's very partisan, as you observed, and it kind of depends. What the law is depends on who you ask sometimes. You referred, I think, to the situation we have now that I've actually been in the middle of a little bit, with a number of attorneys general and treasurers on the Democrat side of the aisle. So red and blue, that's the U.S., right? Red states, blue states. So red states, if you want to generalize, are tending to, they don't like this notion that environmental considerations should come into investment decisions. It's not so much ESG, so governance is just corporate governance. So that obviously goes into investment decisions. Is the company being run properly and not suffering from conflicts of interest and things like that? The social part, really gets into DEI, and that's certainly not a popular thing on one side of the political spectrum in the U.S. But environmental is really where most of this is going on, and things like boycotting investment firms that have ESG funds set up that they're promoting to their clients, which are usually going to be the large investment funds, state pension funds, obviously sovereign funds around the world, the larger investors. But in the U.S., it's playing out on the state pension fund level and municipal pension fund level, because those are government-run pension funds. The very largest investors, CalPERS in California with over $500 billion, New York State with over $100 billion. So very large investment funds, where are they going to put their money? And so the conflict is over, should environmental considerations and ESG generally come into play? The argument I've heard is that, in fact, good ESG compliance is the same thing as investment, as promoting good investment returns. So I think at some point, maybe down the road, we might see some economic studies to show if, in fact, companies that have strong ESG cultures, where they are on the right side of the environmental question, have good internal social controls, and are governed properly, are they going to have the best returns overall versus companies that don't? I mean, I guess we'll see, we'll find out, but that's really where the argument is. And the rule of law becomes an interesting question because you have some US states trying to impose authority outside those states onto other states. And it really goes both ways, because on the Democrat side, you've got rules saying, you know, we want to have these things, we want to have these considerations, and maybe that violates a Texas law. So it's getting a little bit confusing. And the latest thing that I'll mention, which we just in the middle of, is several, I think about 12 Republican attorneys general have been on a campaign to influence the proxy voting of funds and the voting being done by investment advisors. And so what does that mean? Does the Attorney General in, let's say, Texas have the authority over an investment advisor in New York? I mean, really, the SEC has authority over investment advisors, so it's confusing now as to who is exercising the proper authority over whom. And so this is where you get into a funny rule of law discussion right here in the US about what is the law on these ESG subjects and who's entitled to try to enforce it. So that's what we have going on here. I imagine it's an interesting subject around the world because other countries must have similar problems. You have people disagreeing. Yeah, not in some courts, not in some courts. Well, if you can pull in the same direction, then that's great.
Yeah.
Here not so much. Here with tug of war, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here also there's the traditionally oil-producing states like Texas or Oklahoma there's a group of vested interests who are trying to support those fossil industries still, even though there are renewable industries which are burgeoning there, which are growing. But,
And it's a question. I mean, Texas has every right, I think, to promote the industry that's important to that state. And so that's an argument. Well, why can't Texas say that we don't want investments going to companies that are not, that are essentially themselves boycotting fossil fuels? So it's a tough question. And I'll say one other thing. It's of course at the Supreme Court level now. I guess last year there was the decision, the EPA decision, where the Supreme Court of the United States decided that it was a decision that restricted the authority of federal agencies, in this case the EPA, to do rulemaking that went too far outside the strict letter of the law that Congress had passed. And that's a real problem because it gets in the way of the EPA trying to keep our water clean and our air clean. And Congress doesn't always do such a good job about spelling out what's supposed to be done. They leave that to the agencies. It's something called the Chevron test, speaking of probably
Chevron is in our country,
right?
yeah.
So the Chevron test is we should defer to federal agencies. The court should. So there's that EPA decision. And of course now we've just gotten into affirmative action, which gets into the social part. And companies are not sure which way to go. Are they supposed to have diversity, equity, inclusion policies when they hire or not? And so what is the rule of law has become a very big question here, I think. And it changes all the time. It's a moving target.
I can understand you don't have to be possibly promote this idea. What I don't understand is that you possibly restrict it. Basically, it's your company or the business choice. If they chose to do so, if there's no law, they chose to do so, you should allow them to do it. But those states saying, even if you voluntarily chose to do, we forbid you.
Well,
Totally.
Exactly. The debate is not so much are companies complying, for example, with the environmental protection laws of the United States. That's an enforcement issue. If somebody's dumping pollution in a lake, theoretically they're going to get in trouble. But yes, as you say, you've got political forces trying to shape company behavior through these quasi-legal but not quite legal influences, and that's all shaking out now.
Totally.
yeah,
It's all political. That's right.
It's all political.
That's right.
it's very political.
One of the problems that I see in the world right now is the radicalization that everything is political, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of people in the center that wants to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And the fact that we have to choose polarized positions all the time is really bad for the vast majority of the people. It's very difficult. It's a challenging day, every day.
Well, yes, and
You know? You
lawyers
know?
who have to advise their investment advisor clients on what to do, really depend, it's very difficult because you've got different states. You can be in trouble almost no matter where you go for different reasons. So that's hard, and I imagine, again, maybe not in China, but in other countries, I'm sure there are these issues that come up. Yeah.
I want to be respectful. If anyone has any questions from the perimeter of the room, with our backs, feel free to ask. Do you have a?
Yeah, actually, I have a question to.
For me? Thank you.
Yeah, because I think your topic is very impressive and interesting. I think
Thank
you
you.
are an expert in the digital transformation. So my question is about, for the digital infrastructure is most important in promoting the digital economy, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, the digital infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
Yeah, infrastructure. Digital
Okay.
Or digital platform or
Yes.
infrastructure. So
Yes.
I'm not sure. As I know, in some countries, when they build digital infrastructure,
Yes.
it has to make it, like we call it, environmental friendly.
Yes.
So
So the thing is,
can we
the
make that
in the digital world, let's say, they are creating a few things that are not real. And so they do experiments and they do many things in the digital twins, so they don't do it in the actual plant. That's the idea of all this. But they use artificial intelligence, robotic, virtual Internet of Things, virtual reality, augmented reality, and smart devices. All of these technologies, they use it, okay, in order to protect the environment. Of course, not all the companies can do it because it's very costly, okay? But the big companies who are making a lot of money, they kind of require themselves to do something like this. And all the big companies are doing twins, okay? Not only in the oil sector, in several facilities and plants around the world, instead of doing, for instance, if they say in a car facility that create cars, like let's say General Motors, and they want to do a digital twin, they say, okay, I want to do this new technique. They do it in the digital twin and try if it works. And if it works, then they do it in real life. But they don't experiment in real life because it can cause damage to the environment and to people. For instance, imagine if they use a painting in the car that inflames. So they can try it in the digital twin without doing it in the real life.
It's a simulation.
It's a simulation, but digital. It's like another world. It's like, what we saw in movies before. Now it is a reality. So it is very important that we as lawyers understand everything that is going on in order to be able to help our clients to have the proper contracts or to read into legislation. And what you say is very important that, for instance, in these type of things, there are a lot of legislations involved. So, for instance, you can get the data from oil field, and then the data goes to China to be analyzed most of the time. So you have to be aware that you have complied with Chinese law and the laws of the countries. So you have to be, you open your mind to see what is going on and understand what is your client doing. Because if you don't understand the digital technology, you won't be able to help. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think we are mostly done. If we don't have any other questions, I've found this to be a really interesting panel with very different perspectives, but in some ways it circles back. A lot of them circle back.
We
to the
agree,
same
not
issue.
everything.
So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.